For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. When you think of what makes a good owner and what makes a bad owner, what is usually the difference in your mind? You can probably think of a few things off the top of your head that separate the men like Jeffrey Lurie and Al Davis from the men like Dan Snyder and David Tepper. Of course, you have the desire to enhance the fan experience and make upgrades whenever necessary to the stadium without using taxpayer money. And you have the willingness to listen to fan feedback. You've got the desire to win and the willingness to spend money wherever necessary to improve the team. You've got an engagement with the community and how well they interact with others. But one of the big ones has to be knowing your role. Yes, as the owner, you own the team and you're in charge of everything. You can do whatever you want, but it is your responsibility to not overstep your boundaries. In other words, let the people that you hired do the things that you hire them to do. You hired a general manager to draft the players? Let him draft the players. You hired a coach to coach the team? Let him coach the team. The last thing you want to do, because it creates a toxic work environment that is usually not conducive to anything productive, is to overstep and make decisions on your own without consulting the people who should be making these decisions. It's almost like if you're a teacher and the superintendent comes into your classroom one night while you're gone and completely rearranges the classroom because they think that this is the best, most productive way to teach a class. You would absolutely hate that, and understandably so. And owners in the NFL are the same way. And if you want to learn more about NFL owners, or just crazy stuff in general from the National Football League, then this is the place to be. Because we talk about all things NFL history all the time on this channel with daily uploads. So if you like that sort of stuff, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on this channel. Thanks in advance for your support as we try to hit 60,000 subscribers. Well, I bring all of that up because the man that you've been watching this whole time is Philadelphia Eagles owner Norman Braman. And he was notorious for being one of the worst owners in the history of the NFL. His cheapness held no bounds, as he would literally charge players for new socks if their socks got holes in them. You can learn more about how bad Braman was as an owner by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Because trust me, he was really bad, to the point where even though he was only in charge for less than a decade, his tenure felt like 100 years and a couple of lifetimes. And we should have known how bad Braman was going to be as an owner during his very first offseason, when he made a move that deserves a deep dive nearly 40 years later. Because imagine if, while Jaguars head coach Doug Peterson was away before training camp, owner Shad Khan, without consulting Peterson, just decided to cut Mac Jones. And when Peterson got back, he didn't have his quarterback because the owner just decided to cut him. Well, that's what happened in 1985 with the Eagles. And we're taking a look at that today. Because this is the story behind Norman Braman and the owner who completely overstepped his boundaries. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what exactly Braman did, we need some context to understand who this man right here, quarterback Joe Pisarcik, is, because he's going to play a critical part in our story. If you know of Joe Pisarcik, odds are you know of him as an Eagles legend, albeit not for anything that he did while with the Eagles. Instead, you know him as the quarterback for the New York Giants during the infamous Miracle at the Meadowlands against the Eagles, where the Giants had the game won, and all they had to do was fall down, and Pisarcik couldn't hand the ball off properly, and the Giants lost as a result of one of the worst play calls in NFL history. Not exactly a great claim to fame. However, in a twist of irony, by 1980, Pisarcik actually found himself on the Philadelphia Eagles. And honestly, as a backup quarterback, you could do a heck of a lot worse. I don't want to say he was good by any means, but of the backup quarterbacks in football, considering how bad some of the rest were, I would comfortably put Pisarcik in that top half of guys. He was one of the top 50 and maybe even one of the top 40 quarterbacks in the game, and a man who could reasonably get the job done if called upon. I'd even go as far as saying that I wouldn't fight you too much if you have Pisarcik by this point near the top 30. Pisarcik was so solid in this backup role that he stayed with the Eagles for the next 5 seasons, even as the team underwent a coaching change from Dick Vermeil to Marion Campbell following the 1982 season when Vermeil walked away. In fact, Campbell loved Pisarcik and felt that he was a really solid quarterback. When Ron Jaworski got hurt at the end of 1984 and Pisarcik came in off the bench, Campbell praised Pisarcik's maturity and how well he played, with Campbell saying on his backup, "I regret Ron's injury. Ron has been a great Eagle, and I just hate to see him suffer such an injury." But Joe came on, and the tempo did not change. In 1984, due to injuries, Pisarcik started 3 games, going 1-2. And across the 176 passes that he threw, he posted a passer rating of 70.6, with the league-wide average being just a hair above 76. So again, not bad for a backup quarterback. He threw 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions with a ratio of 1-1, with the league-wide average being just a hair above 1-1 at 22 touchdowns per team and 21 interceptions per team. So again, not bad for a backup quarterback. He completed 54.5% of his passes, with the league-wide average being somewhere around 56%. So again, not bad for a backup quarterback. In terms of a backup quarterback, while you could definitely do better, you could absolutely do a heck of a lot worse. And even though the 1985 offseason was definitely a period of change for the Eagles, as they drafted UNLV quarterback Randall Cunningham in the 2nd round of the NFL draft to be the future, with Ron Jaworski getting up there in age, it didn't seem as though Joe Pisarcik's roster status was in any jeopardy. Like I said, Campbell loved Pisarcik, and many thought that Pisarcik would even have a chance at competing for the starting job, depending on how Jaworski looked. If Randall wasn't ready, and spoiler alert, he definitely was not ready in 1985, Pisarcik could, in the worst-case scenario, be the number 2 option for the 6th straight season, and could come in when necessary as a veteran backup. So when the Eagles started training camp, it was definitely a surprise when Joe Pisarcik was not there. Despite the fact that there were talks about him potentially being the starter for the season, and despite the talks about a 3-man quarterback room in Pisarcik, Cunningham, and Jaworski, it stunned a ton of people when that room before 1 preseason game was reduced to 2, and Pisarcik was not there. And that's because the Eagles cut him. Before the start of training camp, the Eagles cut their longtime safety net and one of the better backups in the league. The move stunned a lot of people. It stunned NFL executives, seeing as Pisarcik was almost immediately picked up by the Miami Dolphins to potentially be the backup to Dan Marino, and some insurance to Marino as he held out in camp for a bigger contract. It stunned fans, who thought that, for a backup quarterback, Pisarcik was pretty decent. And the man it stunned the most? None other than head coach Marion Campbell. Because as it turned out, Campbell didn't cut the man that he'd been watching this whole time. As it turns out, Campbell had no say whatsoever in the decision to cut the man. Owner Norman Braman just decided to cut Pisarcik behind Campbell's back. Seriously, like I said at the top of the video, imagine if Shad Khan just cut Matt Jones without consulting Doug Peterson whatsoever, and before camp started, with nothing happening between Khan and Jones from an altercation or off-the-field standpoint that would lead to such a rash decision. Well, that's what happened here with Braman and Pisarcik. And you can believe that Marion Campbell was ticked off about this, and rightfully and understandably so. You're telling me you just cut my quarterback and didn't even consult me beforehand? No heads up? You just cut him on your own when you're the owner and shouldn't be involved this heavily in these football decisions? Yeah, this did not go over well with Campbell whatsoever, because upon hearing the news about the release, Campbell put out a statement that basically amounted to, "Don't blame me. I had nothing to do with this." Said Campbell, it was a decision on management's part to release Joe now and go with the younger guys. Management made a decision, and that's all I can really say about it. I really can't comment on it any more than that. You can tell based on that statement that the reaction was astonishment and stunned surprise. Campbell had nothing. He had no justification or explanation as to why this happened. but he had nothing to do with this whatsoever. Norman Braman completely went over his head. And if that wasn't bad enough, before I break down what Braman said about this release, there's two other things that make this even more absurd than it already is. Number one, you would, at a bare minimum, think that Braman was around to tell Pisarcik the news that he was cut, since this was his decision. At the very least, you would think that Braman was somewhere in Philadelphia. But nope. Turns out, Braman was on vacation in France, so he was an entire ocean away when he made this decision. He just decided, in the middle of his vacation, maybe sipping on too much French wine, you know what would be a good idea? Let's cut our quarterback. But number two, beside the fact that Braman was away when he cut Pisarcik, Braman openly said in his introductory press conference that he was not going to interfere with the football operations and interfere with how the team was being run. And then, before the Eagles so much as had their first official practice at training camp, he goes ahead and does exactly that. Doesn't even last one day. Said Braman back in March, just a few months before all this went down, it's the coach's job to run the team. If you're asking me if I'm capable of telling Marion Campbell how to run the team, the answer to that question is no, I'm not. So much for that. So much for freaking that. Didn't take long for you to change your mind on that one, did it? Didn't even take one practice for you to try running the team. Just decided to cut a guy while you were in France and go over the coach's head with this one, not even discussing the move with him beforehand. When Braman finally returned from his French vacation, sans Joe Pisarcik on the roster obviously, he addressed the media about the decision. And his logic made no sense whatsoever, to the surprise of no one. Because Braman said that he was not telling Marion Campbell whatsoever how to coach his team, because determining who's on the roster isn't coaching. Yep. Who knew? Who knew that figuring out what players you want has nothing to do with coaching whatsoever, and is completely independent? That's news to me. You think the general manager and head coach work in secret or something? They never talk with each other about these things? Come on. Just come on. Said Braman, I don't think that's coaching. I think Marion understood. Spoiler alert, based on those comments that Marion Campbell made, he did not. But then again, I'm not surprised that Braman had no idea that Campbell was ticked off about this, because he didn't get Philadelphia news while he was in France. As Braman continued, if I had spoken to him, and I think he was away, I don't think there's any problem there. But you didn't speak to him. That's the whole point. If you hadn't spoken to him about this, and Campbell agreed, then you're right. There's no problem here. But you're missing the entire point of why Campbell is upset. And you thought he was away, so you didn't even try to contact him? Dude, you had months to make this decision. You couldn't wait until training camp to speak to him? You had to do it just a few days before you got back, when you were in France? And if that wasn't enough, Braman continued, saying, it's kind of insane to draft a player like Randall Cunningham, sign him, then cut him. There's no logic to that. And you're right. You weren't going to cut Randall Cunningham. You're not cutting your second-round draft pick. But who said anything about cutting him? You didn't need to cut Pisarcik or cut Cunningham. It wasn't a binary decision. It wasn't an either-or decision. You could keep 3 quarterbacks. Maybe someone gets hurt and you need Pisarcik and you don't have to cut him right now. No one in their right mind ever said that Cunningham was in danger of missing the roster if Pisarcik stayed on. Then again, nothing about what Braman said made any sense, because Braman said that the Eagles were going to be in the playoffs, then followed it up by saying that even if the 11 holdouts that the Eagles had were in camp, they wouldn't be in the playoffs because the team is rebuilding and looking toward the future. Because that makes sense. The Eagles are in the playoffs and not in the playoffs at the same time. Schrodinger's football team, everyone. Trying to follow anything that Norman Braman did was like trying to analyze a 5-year-old story after they went on a massive sugar rush. It will just make your head hurt. And this was a prime example of that. And it's no real surprise that when it came to this team behind me right here, that Marion Campbell's days as the head coach of the Eagles were shortly lived after this incident. Braman became the owner in March of 1985, and Campbell did not even last the entire season, as he was removed from his post before the season was over. You can learn more about Marion Campbell's tenure with the Eagles by clicking the card in the upper right corner, but safe to say, there was a lot of tension there. Now, Joe Pisarcik never played another down in the NFL again due to injury, even though he did sign with Miami. So even though Braman might have had the right idea here, this is still very clearly something that you do not do, and you don't go behind the back of your head coach to make a move like this unless you really want to create the most toxic environment possible. So if you're an NFL owner who happens to be watching this video for whatever reason, two things. Number one, you've got a ton of money. And if you want to Venmo or Cash App me some of that, I would greatly appreciate it. But number two, under no circumstances should you be making football moves over the heads of the people designed to make these moves. Communication is key. I know some owners are way more involved in the operation than others. Some owners have a huge say in football-related matters, and others are more laissez-faire and hands-off. And I'm not going to say there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But if you are going to be involved in the operations, at least tell everyone what you're doing and make sure everyone's on the same page. If the head coach is shocked that a player isn't in camp because, as it turns out, you cut him without telling the coach, don't be surprised if tensions rise as a result. Because in 1985, when it came to Joe Pisarcik and the entire handling of that situation, the Eagles under Norman Braman changed their fight song to Fly, Eagles, Fly, on the road to secrecy. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.